If there is something among many things that I hope I've made clear to viewers of this channel, and now to people stumbling onto it through this video, it's that I think horror is one of the most powerful vessels for emotionally potent storytelling. A genre that is ostensibly about drawing some of the most primal and base feelings out of observers through the use of evocative and unsettling imagery, a genre that at its purest level is about drawing you in while making you want to flee, is one beautifully fit to speak to fears and struggles in life deeper than being spooked by a man on your television screen. I've talked extensively at this point about its power for portraying queer experiences in unique ways, telling stories about the pains of growing up and allowing for explorations of complex systems in society, but something among the many things I haven't touched on is how much it's also a perfect vehicle for exploring the human capacity for perseverance, our ability to fight through darkness beyond our comprehension and still somehow come out on top. It's no small or obscure part of horror in the slightest, but it is one that I think many pieces of media struggle to pull off well. Much as I think the term torture porn is woefully overused, it does exist for a reason. But for today's video, I want to highlight a work that does this right by an author that many of you have been asking me to talk about for a while now, Izumi Banya. To say he's prolific is an understatement. He's credited as having at least some role in 125 games over the course of 21 years, contributed in no small part to personal favorite group Black Psych building up their reputation as a kinky queer horror studio, and wrote a long-running series that many people swear by being one of the best entries into the VN genre ever. We'll get to some of his most famous works in due time, but as many of them are fairly long and I'm stuck in moving hell and I don't want to voice an 8-hour-long script while I have a cold like this, I want to focus on one of his shorter and most recent titles today, Shiniyuku Kimi, Yokata ni Mebuku zo, often shortened to Niku Niku or Shiniyuku for brevity. As far as I can tell, developer Bug System's second title saw some moderate success, even cracking the top 100 sales charts on a few sites when it came out in 2016, though it's now mostly faded into the annals of time, which doesn't surprise me given that it's the kind of game that has a really specific audience. Put simply, it's an apocalyptic erotic horror time loop visual novel about a woman who gets kidnapped by a humanoid alien and tortured to death again and again and again, forced to persist through hell and back to amuse her captor who wants to see the extent of human resolve, before eventually triumphing through her sheer refusal to give up hope in the face of certain death. If you're like me and you're into weird sci-fi and horror, that combination of words might have already grabbed your interest. A lot of my favorite horror films are precisely about women surviving hell, being cool and refusing to give up even when it seems there's no other choice, but as someone with the attentiveness of a pet bunny, I didn't ever actually read that plot summary on the VNDB or store pages. What caught my attention was both Banya's role as lead writer and the absolutely gorgeous artwork provided by Ruby-sama that seemed almost way too cute for a dark horror game where a protagonist gets impaled by spikes and electrocuted to death. And when I say dark, I do mean it. Shiniyuku is a challenging read that pulls no punches to brutality and gruesomeness of its content, seeking to push the reader to their limits again and again and again, just like it does to its protagonist, and in equal parts give them small breaks to provide just enough fuel to keep going. It stars a protagonist that learns even in the face of certain death she cannot quit, that no matter how terrible life becomes, there will always be some sort of hope. It's a game about the uniquely human ability to find light in darkness and hold on to that light for dear life as the world around us crumbles, carrying it through the depths of hell and back out again to forge a new path. And it's also about the complex feelings that abuse leaves us with, and it's about the inhumanity of nihilism, and it's about family. I am not someone who can call themselves a master understander of horror. I'm just someone who casually enjoys it and reads and watches a fair bit by happenstance. Apparently enough happenstance that people call me a horror YouTuber. But speaking as someone who loves it and has been through her own kind of hell, Shiniyuku has been one of the most deeply personal and resonant stories I've read, and it's a game I am beyond excited to talk about. So without further ado, let's dive right into it and finally look at a horror title by a writer many of you have been requesting for me to cover. Shiniyuku is set in modern-day Japan, for about 0 lines of text before it all goes south. It wastes no time getting into the thick of things, as suddenly on one otherwise typical day, our normal reality crumbles into nothing, with magic-wielding creatures suddenly appearing on Earth and effortlessly massacring the human race. With the military unable to fight back in any way and no hope for civilians to survive, the few humans that escape the chaos are forced to find shelter wherever they can, one of which happens to be our protagonist, a girl named Mia. After the rest of her family is mercilessly slaughtered, she flees into a forest where she encounters one of the mysterious creatures that's responsible for the chaos, devouring the corpses of the dead. Fueled by nothing but pure rage, she rushes in for the kill, which seems to upset him more than anything else, effortlessly retaliating against her using his powers and telling her she's committed a grave sin, one that she must die a certain death 10,000 times over for. Some unknown time later, she wakes up alone in an unfamiliar mansion with a fragmented memory and shortly after meets again with the man who nearly killed her. He explains explains to her that he belongs to a nameless advanced alien race who lives only to devour other species on other planets. But unlike his cohorts sowing carnage outside, he's not just interested in killing for sustenance. He wants to see what humans are made of, and Mia has caught his attention as the one person that was able to hurt him. And so he has a game for her. She's allowed to live in this manor, with a room to herself that's enchanted to heal all wounds, but she cannot die nor escape unless she kills him. A rather unlikely outcome given his magical powers and superhuman strength. And until she finds out how to take his life, he's going to keep testing the limits of the human body and soul, starting with breaking her arm that night and later killing her the next, only for her to wake up remembering mere fragments of what led up to this point. Thus begins a game to the death, between a determined young woman who must learn the secrets of the mysterious species to win, and an alien man who wants to see all that humanity has to offer for his own entertainment. The dark and the brutal, the light and the kind, the cold and the cruel, and all that lie in between. A near infinite loop that'll repeat until she wins or his time on Earth ends and he leaves to devour another planet, all set in a sprawling mansion of a plethora of guests to spice up the game. A rotting former inhabitant who goes about his days cleaning, a mysterious alien guest motivated by her own desires, other kidnapped people taken in as food of their own goals and motivations, and a few mysterious girls that the man of the mansion treats with unexpected kindness, who may mean more to Mia than she realizes. As the days march on with each untimely end she faces and each revival she goes under, only time will tell what becomes of everyone there, society as it withers, and the young woman trapped in the middle of all of it, forced to reset from almost nothing each time she fails and is killed, while slowly solving the mysteries of the apocalypse and the species behind it. Shiniyuku has a gripping, fast-paced opening, and from there on establishes itself as some fascinating dark horror out to tackle huge topics. While I think it answers all that it brings up satisfactorily, particularly the themes I mentioned earlier about hope and despair and questioning nihilism, what serves as an underlying basis for it all is the excellent world building. Although most of the game takes place inside of one single mansion, it never forgets that there's an apocalypse actively happening outside. Most of the info about what's going on is relayed secondhand by the mysterious man in the revolving door of guests, such as the hopeless yet cooperative Natsuka and the cold and desperate Kokono, brought in by said man as feed to keep him alive. Yet despite Mia never stepping foot outside once she's locked in, you can still viscerally feel the destruction of the world through the atmosphere and the way it's talked about by guests, which makes for a really melancholic end of the world. I survived the era of every other big film in the United States being about some huge disaster and people having to navigate it, and I also remember when The Walking Dead was all the rage, so reading a story that's set during an apocalypse but not exactly within it feels like a breath of fresh air. Besides the intro, you aren't going to be seeing any scenes of the world falling into disrepair or cities abandoned while sad music plays. It's just this slow, solemn decay you learn scraps about, made all the more confusing by the Deathloop shenanigans. It takes a long time for it to be clear how the timeline of events goes because the story mostly follows Mia's perspective and dying isn't really kind to your memory. One day, someone could be telling you that tens of thousands of people are hiding in ruined cities, and the next day someone will tell you that the entire human race is on the brink of extinction. Did all that happen over the course of a week? Months? Years? The game keeps the true nature of things hazy up until the very end, always carrying with it this sense of slow decay that makes for a very wistful atmosphere. While this could have resulted in a story that feels like a confusing mess to try and decipher, I was pleasantly surprised by how easy the plot was to follow. It may sound a bit messy if you try to summarize it, as it is structurally repetitious due to the looping, but that's in no way a bad thing and was very clearly intentional. Each loop brings upon some new realization and changes both minor and major, with constant character development throughout. Even when her memory fails her, Mia still grows in subtle yet impressive ways, as does her alien captor. The Joyous Suzoku, literally superior race, though I'm just going to call them superiors, are one of the most captivating sci-fi aliens I've seen in a while, if not only in their simplicity. They look like humans and talk like humans, but have superhuman strength, near immortality, magic powers, and absolutely no moral code to speak of. Their entire existence is killing at a base level. They don't really have a society either. They're all nameless, tend to work alone, and generally seem to have the intellectual capacity of a weasel. They kill spontaneously, move from one place to another spontaneously, and get down with it spontaneously. They are purely nihilistic beings with no greater meaning in their life, and the ways in which they differ from humans, both in those greater distinctions and more minor ones, makes them feel foreign and fascinating enough to be convincingly alien, but there's also not an entire dictionary's worth of unique jargon to learn. Much as the basic premise may make this seem like it could be a dense and incomprehensibly metaphorical read, Shiniyuku's writing is easy to digest owing to Banya's style of prose. Quick, pointed sentences that are grammatically simple simple, combined with a vocabulary that's never especially verbose, makes for a remarkably breezy experience that's still full of character. It's also entirely in the third person, describing the world around Mia and others objectively, and merely relaying their thoughts and feelings. Coming off of having just played and produced a feature-length video about Gun Katana, which bounces around perspectives with the fervor of a pinball at some points, it's a very welcome change, and the game doesn't miss any of the empathy or deep understanding that can be lost in a more objective point of view. There's always this emotional slant to it that's understanding of what the protagonists are going through, but without being patronizing. They're allowed to feel the emotions that they do, but it's not dwelling in pity or sadness, and in equal parts celebrates their victories and happiness. Much as I love poetic, deep, and flavorful prose, I think it's equally worth commending authors that have mastered writing like this that can be simple and to the point, with the contents of the story and the emotions of the characters speaking for themselves. And they have a lot to say. Mia is certainly what you'd call a strong female protagonist, but unlike a lot of other characters that fall into that trope, she's not at all coded as masculine, nor some hyper-feminine archetype to subvert that, or even the kind of femme fatale that you see in a lot of rape revenge films, which I've seen this game compared to a couple times. Though Shiniyuku is structurally and executionally very different from those, I don't think it's wrong to draw parallels to that genre of cinema for some of the adult content of this game at a basic level. It is, after all, a title where a woman is brutally wounded and hurt by an inhumanly evil fang, yet persists despite it and takes matters into her own hands. What separates Mia from protagonists in films like that is she doesn't go on a power trip by the end of the story, sans one non-canon ending, and she doesn't start the story being portrayed as vulnerable. She's brave, quick-witted, kind, and incredibly smart, but not blindly hopeful or immune to pain and failure, and most impressive to me, she's consistently portrayed as an average person who responds to traumatic events and situations in ways that I've found really relatable. Part of that is, no matter what, she never completely loses her hope for too long, nor is she deprived of joy. There's many points in the story where she's allowed to have moments of happiness that aren't just fleeting glimmers, but memories she holds onto and treasures in her darkest moments when hope is most needed. And she's able to pass it on to others who are struggling in the darkness too, even if what remains after death is just a vague visage of a nice emotion. That said, that darkness is often overwhelming. It's a horror game, so you know from the outset it's not going to be a good time for her. Already by the start, she's lost her family, and just a few hours in, she's died in multiple horrible ways, been tortured and threatened into fearing what's outside her room, and see people that could have been good friends die right in front of her, only to die herself and have her memories, but not the feelings, ripped away when she wakes again. Even beyond me adoring the way that literal death and rebirth is used as an allegory for how painful traumatic experiences are, I also find the reflections Mia has on them to be captivating and resonant. One of my favorite descriptions of these emotional impacts comes early on in the game. Like she had forgotten something important, like a void had opened in her heart, these mysterious feelings would not leave her. As someone who's gone through a lot of events and felt that exact same thing, down to my mind refusing to recall events in any way to keep unpleasant emotions away, but those emotions come in anyways, that's a pretty painfully real summary. And it's within these engrossing, heart-wrenching, and quiet, contemplative moments where Mia is alone in a room and thinking to herself that Banya's sense for emotions really shines. The writing allows her to feel despair, pain, and sadness, but that's never seen as a weakness or failure on her end. Conversely, she's strong because she feels those things and lives despite them. She has the ability to be hurt and traumatized, and she has the ability to be sad for long times, unsure of what to do, and even hopelessly depressed, but she also is able to turn that pain into fuel to keep going, never robbed of her hope for too long despite all that she goes through. I'll talk more about this in the spoiler section, but I think it's this unwavering yet still realistic hope that makes Shiniyuku such a grounded and captivating story. The game wants the player to see Mia's struggles and look at her not as someone in need of pity, but as someone going through it, and maintaining hope despite that, with the title actively refuting nihilistic outlooks on the world beyond moments of overwhelming despair. And that hope is very often needed, especially when it comes to dealing with our main antagonist. The man who kidnapped Mia, interchangeably referred to as the man of the mansion and the superior man, is one of the few in a species that seems to have an interest in anything other than killing. While he does enjoy it as much as the rest do, he also finds himself more deeply fascinated by humans than any other species he's encountered. Unlike a lot of horror villains that end up as such because of what the world's done to them or because they're written to be plainly evil, all of his cruel deeds come from a unique, emotionally blind, clinical curiosity that's outside the realms of normal human morale. Everything he does to Mia is in service to him trying to understand the human body and will as an outsider, and the deeds he does for that lead him to places good, bad, and mostly utterly abhorrent. While the story touches on the morality of his actions here, particularly as it pertains to whether or not it's right for humans to condemn another species that also kills sentient beings, the way that he acts towards Mia at points, and to a few other key characters throws a huge wrench into the answer that takes it from late-night TV philosophical drivel to something completely down-to-earth by the end. Banya does a remarkable job at delivering information about them naturally, too. The man drops little hints about his species even when he's not actively explaining it to sate Mia's curiosity, and the game expects the reader to be playing detective alongside Mia to try and make sense of what's going on with him, as well as the time shenanigans and everything going on inside the mansion. Once the reveals do inevitably come rolling in as the plot progresses, I always had this sense that I could have solved things before Mia if I fought just a bit harder, and the moments where my Pepe Sylvia level theory crafting did come true had me smiling from ear to ear. The dynamic between him and Mia shifts quite a bit throughout the game too. At the beginning, I think I can best describe it as what would happen if you took a final girl and the big bad of a film and locked them in a mansion together for a while. They might be trying to kill each other for a while, sure, and they're probably gonna get pretty good at it, but eventually they're just gonna start sitting down and talking in between sessions and learn about each other's lives, maybe even fuck around with less terrible relationship goals. It's not quite a respectful sports rivalry animosity in the first quarter, but it's not a downright murderous hatred where they refuse to even talk to each other. Part of that is because Mia can't remember much of what happened each time she dies and comes back to life, but another part of that is because the superior man is genuinely interested in having a fair and exciting game rather than a boring, easy kill. Once other characters get introduced though, things start changing and the hunt becomes a lot more fierce. With exception to a few characters like the mysterious tiny pink-haired girl also named Mia, the level of respect and interest the man has in anyone that isn't Mia, not Tiny, is way lower, and the fates he has them meet are as much for his own enjoyment at seeing Mia emotionally suffer in unique ways as they are to study what humans do when forced into terrible situations. I think what I love most about these moments is that, even here, Shiniyuku still mostly keeps up an empathetic view of humanity. People often act selflessly up until their last moments, and even when they do things that can be construed as selfish, such as escaping on their own and leaving someone else behind, it's completely understood why. It makes for a lot of moments that are optimistic about people surviving, as they are painful and melancholy about what people have to do in these situations, as opposed to simply falling into the apocalypse fiction trope of everyone being senselessly out for themselves. These side characters don't get a whole ton of screen time, maybe 2 or 3 hours each, but they all feel really well developed within that, with my personal favorite probably being the other superior, the guest. Unlike the alien man who captured Mia, who tends to display more subtle emotions, she is downright horny for murder and games of killing, the lighting and seeing the suffering of others. The way she engages with the human cast feels just as inhumanly cruel and foreign as the superior man, but in a completely different way that makes for a nice contrast between the two, and her desire to be there exclusively for the sake of fun leads to a lot of cool moments of Mia and co playing 4D chess with her in some of the most tense and atmospheric sections in the game. Shiniyuku is one of the first games I've played in a while, probably since I played the original Condemned back in 2021, that actually made me tense up regularly. The writing does an incredible job at utilizing the strengths of visual novels as a medium to be spooky as hell, using short lines of text to keep up tense pace during nerve-wracking moments, cleverly deployed music cues, subtle visual and oral cues, and a lot of subversions of expectations both within the established world and in genre conventions. One of my favorite examples of this is with the Rotting Man, a former inhabitant of the mansion that the superior man turned into, well, a rotting man. If you're at all familiar with erotic anime or manga that involves monsters, you'd probably go into this game expecting there to be some sort of scene involving him that's meant to gross the player out. And for a while, it does build up to this. Anytime he's on screen, there's this horrible sense of dread that something is going to go wrong, that he's going to in some way hurt Mia. And then, all of a sudden, after tons of build-up made to make you fear him, she works up the courage to talk, and it turns out he's actually a good guy who's struggling too. There is always a sense of tension with him throughout the game, since his allegiance isn't quite clear until the end, but it is at least made obvious early on that Banya has no intent of using the man in any cruel and uncomfortable way. Instead, he's treated with sympathy for the situation he's in. It doesn't even make fun of how he looks or anything, and even has some really incredible character development moments later on that endeared me to him. As much as I do think this is one of the best bits of subtle horror in the title, I don't really mind spoiling this early game detail because, 1, it's so early on, but 2, it again shows Banya's desire in his writing to humanize his characters and use them as more than just plays for erotica. And also, 3, the game has so many different parts that aim to unnerve the player that I can't imagine knowing just this one negatively impacting anyone's playing experience. The horror here is wildly varied and situational and never feels like a one-trick pony. Banya's strong command of the language allows the game to flow between all of these different moods, tense and atmospheric, solemn and sad, terrifying and visceral, and joyful and optimistic, with incredible ease, making for an overall well-balanced script that knows how to draw varying emotions out of the reader at key moments without ever ever giving a sense of tonal whiplash. It all adds together to make an experience that's constantly engaging conceptually and writing and in execution, and even superbly well paced. The game knows how much mileage it can get out of its concepts and is an appropriate length for that. It took about 18 hours on my end, but I've seen some people say about 10 to 100% it at native level reading speed, which for the record isn't too hard to do. The Shiniyuku's story is structured in a very basic way for a visual novel, having one true end, two normal ends, and a handful of bad ends that result immediately from bad choices. If you intend to play this game, I would personally recommend getting all of them. Even if none of the false ends hit the same emotional high as the true end, they all still have good character development and contribute to the themes. For the sake of expediting video production, I used a guide to play for the game and keep track of progress, but even without that, I can't really see this one being a title that confuses either genre newcomers or veterans. It helps too, the game has a robust content repeat system, marking red text and previously made choices in a different color. The engine used here is very solid in general, being one of many titles to run on Kirikiri. The only thing that might be a downer to some is that it runs at a fixed resolution of 1280 by 720, which continues to be a common choice for VNs, but you can get around this easily for real-time scaling tools like Magpie, because the actual in-engine scaler is expectedly a smudge fest. The low resolution certainly doesn't have an impact on the quality of the art, which is absolutely gorgeous as expected of a title illustrated by Ruby-sama. Pretty much as soon as I posted about covering this game on Twitter, I had multiple people saying they wanted to play it literally just because it has her art in it, and I can't say I'm any different from that, seeing as a couple of these CGs online immediately got my interest for how well illustrated they are. Her style is soft, cutesy, and very moe, but also very complex. The rendering is utterly gorgeous and stylish, clothing is wonderfully detailed, and the faces in particular are really emotive and pretty. It's small, but I think what strikes me the most in her style is the eyes. There's so many layers of coloring and fine details, with every character being subtly different. I am a huge fan of the designs as a whole and how they work in the game thematically. Having the superiors wear and provide some of the other humans with beautiful ornate dresses and suits adds a lot to the atmosphere, contrasting with the brutal goings-on of the mansion and the outside world with an understated beauty. It must also be said that, for as pretty as the general game assets are, like the fantastic standing sprites, the rest of the art team's backgrounds, and the stylish UI, the CGs are what really take the cake here, adult or otherwise. All of Ruby-sama's talents, from her strong sense of anatomy to her jaw-dropping coloring to everything I mentioned a moment ago, comes to full fruition here, and it is goddamn fantastic, and there's a lot to go around. Quite a few of these safer work ones have made their way onto my phone and computers as backgrounds, and I definitely see them staying there for a while. The way all these assets are employed in the game certainly isn't lacking either, as the staging here is incredibly well refined. There's an almost cinematic flair at points, most evident in sequences where CGs are subtly panned and cropped for effect like a shot in a film hiding its big reveal, and every single time the game does this, you either never see what's coming next, or even if you do, it's still utterly terrifying and tense. On top of that, you have the way characters are placed on the screen, how they wiggle around and emote and change expressions and stances, the usage of shifting aspect ratios, scaling to convey motion and distance, the placement of sound effects and music. It's all very deliberate and thought through, and shows an immense amount of talent on behalf of the scripting, writing, and artist teams. That effort extends out to the adult scenes as well. Before I get into describing the Guro, I want to make something about it completely clear. I think they're fantastic from a thematic standpoint, and how they're used as allegories for traumatic events and are worked into the story is incredibly fascinating. That said, they are also very far on the deep end, with almost every scene featuring some sort of brutalization of whoever's on the receiving end. There are one or two more scenes that are more vanilla, but they pale in comparison to the number of electrocutions, stabbings, shootings, boiling alive, and spike piercings, just to list a few. It is through and through an Guro and Ryona game, but to the extent in which this is and is not portrayed as erotic is something I find fascinating. Banya and Ruby-sama are definitely sickos, positive to an extent. The former writes and subs in on games of everything from vanilla romances to what you see in this title, and the latter seemed like she was having an absolute blast illustrating here. The contrast between a woman who sounds like this and illustrates this is truly admirable, and yet that empathy I described at the game before shines through even here. The prose not following the viewpoint of either the abused or abuser means it can take a much more collected stance on what's happening, yet it's also incredibly empathetic to Mia's feelings like the rest of the game is. And Ruby-sama's art portrays the suffering and pain in a way that feels in tune with the intent of the writing, this being one of the rare few titles where the erotic framing of some CGs didn't give me tonal dissonance. The best way way I can describe it is, if you're not already into this stuff as a concept, this game is certainly not going to make any strong attempts to get you into it, and I've seen many others echo this opinion. Despite how extreme it is, I honestly feel it's a lot easier to bear than some other titles I've played that feature torture and non-con precisely due to how it's written. The empathetic prose, the clinical curious outlook of the superior man, and the way that all of what happens affects the story in a meaningful and impactful way makes the content feel like it's worth way more than just erotica for people in the Guro. I also want to give Bug System props for actually allowing you to disable sound effects and background voices in just these scenes and not the rest of the game. It seems like it's become common for VNs to have sex sounds, which, like, I've never found erotic or enjoyable. It's just distracting and off-putting to me, even in games that are more my taste, so being able to switch it off is very welcome. This is by no means a fault of the sound designers or voice actors here, though, who all do a fantastic job. The sound effects throughout the game are absolutely fantastic, with no blaringly obvious and distracting stock sounds or out-of-place effects that don't fit the atmosphere. The Foley effects in particular deserve some mention for creating some truly unsettling moments, though every effect, and particularly the way they're used in the game, is far above average. And the voice acting, as expected from a cast of experienced eroge VAs, is absolutely fantastic. The real star of the show here has to be Yoneshima Nozomi as Mia, who I think does such a good job that I can't imagine any other seiyuu pulling her off as well.
つまり、あなたが他の世界に行くまでに、私は本当に殺されるってことね。
Though all the other performers deserve props as well, everyone elevates the characters far beyond the printed text. My only real complaint with the VA is neither of the men in the game are voiced. I kind of understand the rotting man given that he's almost entirely incapable of speech, but why is the superior man not voiced? I've heard that eroge studios do this because most edo gamers just don't care about male VAs, but I don't know fucker cum oomphies. All I know is that it's a shame that someone with such a well-defined character voice doesn't get a real physical voice. Thankfully, I don't have any criticisms to make towards the soundtrack of the game. Composed by the rather obscure sound unit Noras, it's a wonderful mix of gentle low-key tunes, tense and atmospheric tracks, and orally overwhelming action bangers that all add an immense amount to the atmosphere while reading. I'm particularly fond of the track Yokon or Premonition, a beautiful and simple piano-only composition that plays during a lot of scenes where Mia is alone in thought. It's a relaxing and comfortingly melancholy piece outside of the game, but within the context of the story, makes the quiet and contemplative moments feel even more meaningful and impactful. And also, I gotta mention them every time they come up, Denkare once again graces his channel as they provided the opening song for this game, Yakata Mawari. While I don't think it's quite as artsy with lyrics as some of their other pieces, it is an absolute banger with some amazing guitar riffs, great production, fantastic singing, and a particularly stellar performance from the band's drummer. With all this said, I think it's finally time we venture into spoiler territory, dive deep into the themes of this title, and why I think it's so fascinatingly resonant and beautiful beyond just a cursory glance. So if what I've said up to this point has gotten your attention and you don't want to are on the fence about spoilers, then I suggest skipping ahead to the end segment of the video and coming back once you've played the game yourself. But before we get to that, I'd like to take a moment to thank all the wonderful, supportive patrons and sponsors that make content like this possible. Hey, welcome to the game dungeon. Oh wait, wrong show. Hello everyone, and welcome again to the mid-roll segment, the time to give life updates, channel updates, shoutouts, and appreciate the patrons and sponsors that make all of this possible. For this time around, there actually isn't too much to update from last time, aside from the fact that my apartment is currently a cramped disaster of a billion moving boxes everywhere, and there's still more to do. Nevertheless, I'm finding time for both videos and music work in between all that, so it's working out somehow, even if I have like no space maneuver. As always, I have to give a massive thank you to everyone who donates to the Patreon every month to keep this going. We're now holding around $13.50 a month and ever so slowly creeping towards $1,400, and all that money goes to rent, groceries, medical expenses, and everything else needed to keep me afloat so I can produce content like this for y'all to watch. YouTube refuses to sponsor me due to what I talk about, so that's the main thing I rely on now, and honestly, I'm pretty happy being crowdfunded like this. I think it's awesome that people want to support content like this. I think it's awesome to get that support directly from people rather than advertisers that I might be subject to the whims to, so thank you everyone. Again, I know I always say that, and I know I always say that, but I am incredibly appreciative for it, and I don't really know how else to express it, so just thank you. I'm gonna keep creating these videos as long as I can. And in my continued effort to give back to the community that makes all of this possible, I'd like to shout out two super cool channels from my ongoing Twitter thread of cool creators, which I'll probably cross-post to Tumblr at some point because I mostly hang out there now. Twitter's gone to hell. Tumblr is Amelie, Doree, all lowercase lowercase, no spaces. But if you'd like to potentially be shouted out at some point in the future, then please leave a reply in that thread or shoot me a message or ask on Tumblr or something. The first channel I want to shout out is One Controller Port, aka Ben Yoder. He's a cool dude I've known for a while now, and his channel talks about a whole number of things, from podcasts to pickup videos to guides on import games, all of which I've found to be entertaining. But what I want to focus on for this shoutout is his video on Babylon's Fall, a video as much about the game as it is about how people shape the discussion around video games. It's a video of a great level of empathy and understanding for the effort that developers put into titles, and a captivating reflection on the ways in which we talk about games during release and long after, and how that affects the ways in which we think about them. Speaking as someone who's worked on a lot of games, I agree with basically everything he says in it about the gaming public and press. It's well edited, well produced, and well written, so if you've got a chance, then check that video out along with his other stuff. It's all criminally underviewed and deserves much more attention than it's gotten. The second is Idolism J, someone who I've actually met before and is a super cool dude in person. His channel is another one of a variety of things, but my favorites are his videos that look at a whole bunch of things united under one theme. Untranslated Saturn games, the Kix puzzle game series, gaming experiences in a particular year, and one of the absolute coolest, a musical journey through the compositions of a fairly forgotten edoge composer. Like, seriously, his video on Naoto Shinishino is absolutely fantastic, and I'm not saying that just because it shouts me out briefly for my video on Possession or in longing for untranslated media towards the end. It's an awesome mix of tunes by an amazing composer with an excellent framing device that I seriously recommend checking out. As with all his other videos, he's a great dude that gets far too few views. With those channels hopefully in your watch later or up in another tab for after this video now, let's take a moment to answer a handful of Patreon Q&As that came in this time. Habibi asks, what's your opinion on Clock Up? It seems that despite its non-mainstream themes, their titles are kind of mainstream due to so many, sometimes questionable reaction videos. This might be kind of surprising coming from someone who plays stuff like the game for this video and plays Black Psych titles, but I've never actually played a Clock Up game, so no real comment. Some of it seems needlessly extreme, some of it seems like it could be interesting, but it's hard to say without really playing. That said, I would maybe be interested in doing a video on Euphoria someday if I could stomach it. I don't know, like, I could stomach this game, but something about Euphoria just makes me feel like I'm gonna have a really hard time. Dana CWSF asks, on the YNK2 video, you mentioned the Japanese being learner-friendly and simple. Are there any other titles that you may recommend as someone's first VN in Japanese? Dokusei Remake and Amazing Grace are both pretty easy and informative reads from what I recall. That said, as long as you stay away from titles with complex, flowy, or artsy prose like some of Maruto Fumiyaki's titles or Tanaka Romeo's games, you'll probably be fine. It's best to go for a title that you're really motivated by and interested in above anything else in my opinion, long as you don't go too far on the prose deep end or understand you may miss some of why it's so resonant. And with that, there's one last thing to go over for this segment, and that's the sponsor of this video, Very OK Vinyl. If you didn't see the spot in the Gun Katana video or haven't watched it yet, they're a little company in Ontario, Canada that sells vinyl records with the soundtracks to games like Sayan no Uta, and most recently on pre-order, Signalis, a game that many people have been telling me to play and has certainly caught my attention for a while. It comes on some absolutely gorgeous transparent red vinyls, with a limited edition also available that has a black splatter. Featuring the whole original score across 3 discs, it's going to sound absolutely fantastic if their previous releases are anything to go by, such as the Saya and Rusty vinyls they sent me to look over in the last video. So if you'd like to secure your copy of the Signalis vinyl limited edition before pre-orders end on August 11th, or the gorgeous purple vinyl to the Ghost Song soundtrack, then head on over to Very OK Vinyl and pick up yours today. Links in the description. They've got tons of other awesome vinyls like Death Note and Bloom Into You from other brands available for sale too. And once again, thank you to Very OK Vinyl for sponsoring the show. With all that said, I think we are good to dive back into the world of Shiniyuku Kimi in just a moment. Again, I want to thank everyone that makes these videos possible. This job has its ups and downs, especially with the internet being as unkind it is to people who talk about content like this, but I could not imagine a more fulfilling job. Getting to talk about games I love, seeing wonderful comments from people who feel moved by my silly commentary, seeing people motivated to pick up Japanese or just get into this genre in general. It all makes me really happy to see, so just thank you. If you'd like to help support the show, get your name on the side like all the cool people scrolling by, watch videos without censors, access to my list of games to cover, suggest titles, see channel updates, and participate in Q&As, then consider making a pledge monthly on Patreon. Minimum for everything is the minimum in your currency, and every little bit a month helps me out a ton. But if you'd prefer to donate one time, I've got a Ko-fi and a PayPal.me as well, and a Bandcamp where I post my game soundtracks and little albums infrequently. But if you don't want or can't donate, then that's fine too. Just liking, commenting, subscribing, and sharing these videos around everywhere makes a huge difference too. They would not be possible without all of that, and I'm super happy just seeing people leave kind words. Again, thank you all so much, and back to the show. One of the most subtle aspects of Shiniyuku's story, and something that I haven't really seen many people talk about online in English or Japanese, is the way that it discusses abusive relationships and the complex feelings they can leave someone with. About whether their memories and feelings are right or wrong, about how their abuser is and isn't capable of love, and about how to feel about any of it when all is said and done. This is reflected most in the dynamic between Mia and the superior man. Throughout the game, she faces a lot of deaths at his hands, many of which she often has no memory of for most of the game, often leading her to repeat mistakes or patterns of thinking until she realizes she's been there before. We, as players, know what's happened objectively, but from Mia's point of view, all that's different between her first and last awakening is a new feeling of emptiness or pain and a vague sense of repetition. It takes familiar events happening or certain things being mentioned in order to spark her memory and recall mistakes, but it's often too late by that point. It's not until the last quarter of the game that she's alive for long enough and has learned enough to start piecing together her past with him, as well as the story's larger puzzles. Of course, this is something that the superior man finds interesting. If she remembered everything every time, then she'd probably be less likely to stumble into new forms of torture to amuse him, and it interests him to see how she often, though not always, avoids making the same mistakes purely by intuition. But mixed in with all of this are moments of showing, or at least performing a mimicry of, human kindness, empathy, and even deep romantic love. The first time this starts to happen is where the plot really shifts in the overdrive, because up until a few hours in, the story mainly focuses on establishing characters and emotions rather than driving things forward. Mia comes into the mansion, finds out about some information, attempts to kill the man in the game, dies, and repeats the cycle. But that eventually breaks when Mia is reminiscing about her family and the pain of losing it to him and the general differences in their existence. To his race, family means nothing. They come into this world all of a sudden, start eating and fucking, and that's it. It makes it all the more surprising to him that humans care so much about their parents, their kids, their siblings, their partners, their friends, that humans often desire deep romantic and familial bonds with one another and can be sad without them. That all leads him to say, unprompted, "So why don't I become your family?" This is the start of one of the longest unbroken loops in the game, where his attitude towards Mia shifts from a calculating, inhuman killer to that of a lover, who, for at least a few months, actively seeks to make her happy. He treats her kindly and cares for her, he gives her plenty of affection, and they even have romantic, loving intercourse with seemingly no coercion. For a time, it seems like their dynamic is shifting away from something antagonistic into real human love, which to Mia feels almost impossible but is welcomed. But Mia suddenly finds herself ill, her temperature is rising, she feels weak, and it turns out she got pregnant because the two species were unexpectedly compatible. And as soon as it comes time for her to go into labor, the superior man suspends her in the air and watches the seemingly impossible birth take place, with it killing Mia in the process. This loop is pretty much the only time the superior man shows a long period of kindness towards Mia, and even if it is revealed to be a farce by the end, him putting on an act purely to learn more about humans, it leaves a deep emotional impact on her that carries between loops even without her memory persisting, and each time he shows her a vague kindness from there, she can't help but recall some fleeting, emotional visage of a love they once had. It's a really clever way of integrating the time loop narrative into the themes in a resonant way, because I think it does truly encapsulate the core of what abusive relationships feel like. At some point, everything just becomes a blur you can't really remember. You become used to cruelty and brutality, so the few moments of what feel like compassion become vessels for self-doubt and confusion. Where I think Shiniyuku separates itself from other narratives with villains like this is that it never tries to redeem or fully demonize the superior man as someone the audience must feel nothing but hatred for. He's not justified as a deep-down good person who's having a rough patch in his life, nor is he demonized as an innately evil being who can't do anything but hurt others. He's a morally incomprehensible alien who is incapable of fully understanding the emotional impact of what he does. The game uses this truth as a vehicle to explore the kinds of feelings this may leave someone with, which we see going forward in the narrative from this point on. During the whole middle portion of the story, where Mia makes acquaintances with people who are being plucked out of jail for eating and sport hunting, dies again and again trying to figure out how to kill her captor, and slowly becomes better at remembering the events of previous loops, there's something mysterious going on with a handful of characters who appear one after another, though never at the same time. A young girl named Mia, a teen named Aimu, and an adult known only as the maid. Each of these three, who seem like they'd be minor additions to the story at first, are all treated with a level of kindness that the superior man shows to absolutely no one else. He tries to give the younger of the two nice things to do, like play outside or plant flowers. He gives the maid freedom around the mansion and doesn't physically hurt her. He looks out for them, and he shows a kind of love for them that feels fatherly. fatherly. He's certainly far from perfect and does awful things, but it feels like there is a weird effort to be familial here. That alone is suspect enough to convey that there's something more happening, but then there's little hints being dropped all over the place about something bigger. Tiny Mia has zero concept of the outside world, Aimu drops hints about having met our Mia many times before, and the maid almost always seems like she's troubled and hiding something anytime she's around Mia. The reality of this, and I'm guessing you might have caught on by my word choices and phrasing, is that all of these are the same person. Mia's daughter, whom she was separated from at birth, taken in by the superior man so he could try out another human experience for the sake of his own entertainment, being a parent and understanding what family means. But the game doesn't make it nearly so obvious, going at every length to try and obfuscate the reader and Mia alike through the usage of red herrings. Some are small but feel major, like the color of her hair being visibly different over the years, and some go way further, with one being a series of scenes that begins with Tiny Mia being set free and ends up with her boiled on the dining table as breakfast the morning after. Even when it lets up a little bit soon after the maid is introduced, with Mia talking to her and suspecting she's Aimu due to knowing about a game only she was shown, the plot still does a good job at dissuading any suspicion both through writing and, well, Mia's memory is all fragmented, so who knows what's right? Who knows if the timescales even line up? This occurs over what feels like just a few months, so how did this tiny kid become this full-grown adult? Looking back after finishing the game though, it's honestly admirable just how much the whole thing is laid out in the open if you know what you're looking for. There's hints all over the dialogue from survivors that implies years-long decay of society, and the somewhat accelerated aging makes complete sense of the mixed species blood. But going further than that, the different hair colors are actually a clear gradient from pink in adolescence to silver in adulthood. The boiled person clearly has a different body from Tiny Mia, the man only treats these characters besides the guest and rotting man without animosity, and my favorite one, Aimu's name is an anagram of Mia. Put it in Latin script, drop the U, rearrange the characters, and there you go. It's a really interesting twist that ties into other twists which completely recontextualize the game, but the reason I bring it up now is that what happens with Mia's daughter, who I'm just going to refer to as Aimu in all eras for simplicity, is relevant to my whole talk about the complexities of abuse and emotions, and Banya's greatest skill as a writer with allowing characters to feel very human and complicated things. The feelings that result from abuse aren't always straightforward. Speaking as someone who lived probably 20 straight years of her life with family, friends, and partners who hurled insults, gaslit, and probably every other thing you can think of short of hitting me, and even now I'm still recovering from things that have happened in the last year with people who are sexually abusive and emotionally manipulative. And yet, I have a lot of good memories with these people. There's advice and consultations they've given me that helped me move past rough times for my life, and I don't think there's anything shameful or wrong about admitting that as long as there's a recognition that it doesn't excuse anything they did. Bad people can do good things, and whether that's by genuine kindness or manipulation doesn't change that it can make us happy for brief moments and leave a lasting impression that clouds our judgment. This quandary is something the mother and daughter here end up having to work through following the climax of the story. Mia can't help but remember the love that man gave for a time, she can't help but remember all those subtle moments where he was being nice to her, and Aimu grew up being loved by him dearly, him wanting to understand fatherhood and family, but that doesn't take away the amount of abuse and trauma he hurled their ways. Aimu has to live with the guilt over the realization that her existence came from her mother's suffering. It leads her to change her name and hide her past from Mia and resolve to do whatever she can in her life when the time is right for Mia to get out and let her be free, even if that means she'll be locked in the mansion forever away from her mother. It's obvious that at no point in the story is he a good man, but that doesn't mean that Mia and Aimu, like real people, can't have confusing feelings of affection and fond memories. The mind is a bizarre, fickle thing, and those feelings are part of what makes it so hard to separate from people who hurt you. And for those two, they're simply left in the end, with many feelings floating to sort out, away from the eyes of the reader. I think it takes some serious guts and skill on Banya's part to be willing to portray such complex emotions and do so without blaming the victims and without justifying the actions of an abuser. These are just things they feel, but it doesn't change the objective reality that this was bad. I also love that he goes out not with a bang but a whimper. The entire end sequence of the game leading up to his passing is an adrenaline rush as Aimu executes a complex plan to deceive her father and allow Mia to escape alone, before Mia promptly decides that she can't ditch her daughter and works together with her to ensure ensure they both escape. The fight that ensues when the whole family meets is intense, with some really impressive staging work to convey speed and force as the half-human daughter and alien father battle it out, before Mia steps in once a gap in his defenses is made to use the one thing that can kill a superior, the blood of another. But once this happens and he's on death's bed, the sequence of his passing isn't some big event, but a quiet, serene, and painfully melancholic moment. Mia doesn't rip apart his now humanly weak body and take revenge, and he doesn't use the last of his life force to fight back. He instead enacts another facsimile of human affection, dying in the arms of someone who once was your lover and letting them see your final moments. This final scene is a really earnest way of depicting the end of a cruel relationship. Many of them do go out violently and horrendously, and sure, we need art depicting that, but equally as many went out quietly and solemnly, leaving me to sort out a whirlpool of conflicting emotions as it all ended with contemplation about what just happened. I think it's this willingness to stay away from the bombastic and instead embrace the bizarre and contradictory nature of human emotions that makes Shiniyuku as resonant of a title as it is to me. For all of the extremeness in its adult content and for all the brutality it showcases, every part of the story is imbued with some sense of melancholic optimism and empathy by the time the true end credits roll, and that goes even for the apocalypse. Although one major event is the impetus for its starting, it goes on for a long time, with a drawn out and painful decay that happens over the course of more than 15 years. And yet, people still hold out during that entire time. They make do in ruined cities, they form small colonies, and once the aliens begin packing up and leaving in the game's ending, it's implied that there's still a few people alive besides Mia and Aimu who persist despite it all. How long they're going to survive is something that nobody knows. The superior man warns Mia and Aimu as he's dying that he doesn't know exactly which day his species will leave the planet, making their future and the future of others uncertain at best. Nobody can predict what will become of the planet or humanity, but does that really matter? People are good-natured and want to care for others, and most of all, Mia and Aimu have each other, loving family, and that's enough reason to hold out hope. There is a series of lines here that close out the game, and I'm paraphrasing a fair bit here for brevity, and also because I suck at translating, but I think they summarize the kind of hope this game wants to imbue its readers with. They say that no matter the hardships they might face, no matter the pains they might see, Mia has decided in her heart she cannot give up as long as she's with Aimu. She knows that there's no need to despair because hope will always exist as long as family does. Hope is what got Mia through the hell she was stuck in for 15 years. It's what she was able to give to the other humans she meets at her time in the manor. Not just her daughter, who she has some incredibly heartwarming and lovely scenes with that make up for all the suffering tenfold, but the side characters who I've mostly not talked about up to this point. Natsuka comes into the mansion hopeless and depressed, knowing she's going to be feeder and saying she wants to die purely out of despair, but both the superior man and Mia see that isn't true. And while the former does his typical spiel of trying to test her limits, Mia lends her a hand. She gives her community, compassion, friendship, and because of it, she gives her hope. Towao is brought by the guest to be served as tonight's dinner, and Mia makes a choice to stake her own life on a change to the game that could hurt her, but it could also save both their lives. Even though she was all but ready to die, she finds herself to having newfound vigor through camaraderie with another woman suffering in the same situation. The only one of the free guests who doesn't quite behave this way is Kokonal, who's so desperate to escape that she double and triple crosses Mia and the superior man alike in hopes of having some way to escape. Which, while it may seem counter to the themes of the game, I think it actually fits pretty well in. She acts as pretty much the stereotype of an apocalypse time human who thinks only of themselves, but the game goes to lengths to demonstrate this is purely out of misery. People, humans, willing to hurt each other are almost never doing it out of desire to only sow chaos and see the result. They do it because they're hurting too. She lost her family, she lost her friends, and now she's been reduced to food to be played with. It's a pretty fascinating contrast with the kind of curiosity-induced violence the superior man inflicts. Hers is purely out of pain. Ultimately though, she's just one person. Humanity still pushed on together for over a decade after a world-upending invasion, and Mia doesn't allow one person to stop her from believing in others. It hurts like hell, it makes her depressed, but she still ends up pushing forward, soldiering on, only now at the end with her daughter by her side. Two people bound by blood who understand each other's pain and will hope together for a brighter future. Something I had to wonder at the end of all of this, though, is just how does the adult content here fit into this narrative? How does a title with bright, hopeful, and optimistic themes like this have multiple sequences of characters getting torn apart or having their guts pulled out? The obvious cop-out answer here is that it's a Guro Nukige, and this is here to sell units, but as I've talked about time and time again on my channel, sexual content and even erotically driven visual novels can often serve a greater purpose than that, and I think it certainly does here on a couple levels. On the absolute most base level, deprived of literally any other context, it gives reason to see the superior man as a bastard firsthand, for the awful things he does to our innocent main character. Most of the time that media does this, and only this, I think it falls completely flat. Showing your characters being horribly tortured or beaten or assaulted or abused often feel like a miserable attempt to get pity out of the audience using an incredibly disturbing vehicle. My last video on Gun Katana very cleanly highlights this by both having roots in scenes that show sexual abuse and empathetic lights for social commentary, and have some utterly incredible resolutions to the content they show, as well as a single small horrible root that gets it all wrong. But on a more thematic level, these are as extreme as they are because they portray how severe different traumas feel: sexual, physical, mental, and so on. The fact that being yelled at by a parent or being indecently touched by someone you know isn't accompanied with physical death doesn't matter. It feels like having your world torn apart. It mentally feels like dying, and the brutality and extremeness of these scenes conveys that effortlessly. Which, at a glance, checks out enough for me. I've certainly gone on for long enough about how well executed the themes are here, but I wanted to try and understand why pain works this way a bit deeper. And to do that, I'm going to talk about a recent English VN, Love and Dehumanization. Developed by the indie dev Aria and released a few weeks ago at the time of writing this, it follows the tale of a girl named Melody who lives in a fairly standard fantasy setting with one big twist that's actually kind of similar to this game. People cannot die, they simply revive. Though, unlike this game, everyone always retains their memories. Naturally, this opens a lot of opportunities for extremely kinky sex, and it's perfect for someone like Melody, who's an extreme masochist with no self-worth. It's through this that the title explores why it is that people may be consensually into very violent, degrading sex and fiction, being punched and kicked, treated like an animal, murdered in horrific ways, etc., and I think the second chapter of the game hits on something really fascinating. In order for someone to do this to you with mutual consent as an act of mutual pleasure, to dehumanize you, they first have to understand the emotions that they're playing with, which requires at a fundamental level to see you as a human with feelings. I think this is where a lot of people get tripped up when they wonder why someone might be into violent kinks like this, as it's something that I think a lot of people, including myself, don't really process because it doesn't feel immediately obvious. I couldn't tell you for the longest time why I thought fantasies of being choked out or insulted were erotic, and for an equally long time they tied up with my feelings of self-hate. They were the only thing I could logically connect them to in my brain, and engaging with it often made me feel more ashamed of myself as a result. This is something that exists at the very core of this game. A huge chunk of the first half is spent examining how desires for loving and consensual violence can be internally misconstrued to drive yourself deep into a pit of depression, but an equally huge chunk is spent exploring how the innate humanization as part of an act from a good dom is fulfilling if you understand, listen to yourself, and have mutual communication over what does and doesn't work. In order to be torn down like this, in order for your dom to take you apart and stab at the parts that feel good to be stabbed in, they first have to understand the feelings behind them. And for someone to recognize you in that way and read your emotions and desires so deeply they can hurt you without hurting you can be a deeply pleasurable and enlightening experience. There's a whole ton you can say about this game, and I really recommend checking it out if you can. It's free, it's about 1 to 4 hours long depending on your English reading speed, and it's a great time that made me ponder a lot about why I'm into the things that I'm into. But to actually get back to why it's relevant to this video, I think Banya has long reached a similar conclusion as to Arya, that pain is an important human feeling that can both humanize and wound us. And I mean, this feels fairly obvious saying it out loud, right? Like, pain is a known part of the human experience, but I've tended to understand it not as a human emotion, but as some foreign part of me to expel and be ashamed of. That's how I've grown up, that's how it's been treated. But the reality is, it is a part of our existence that matters, and it has the capacity to both make us feel more real, and to allow us to feel a deeper bond of someone we trust, and just as equally damage us if it controls us or we're given it when we aren't safely desiring it. While Arya's game is focused on exploring this in the context of self-hate and consensual acts, Banya's looks at what happens when it's forced onto us and exaggerates it to an extreme extent to make it connect. Though I have a feeling this game's spiritual successor, Monakashi, may touch on the other side of things. Obviously, there's a physical world of difference between your parent berating you and having your guts torn out, but emotionally they're both scarring and impactful, aren't they? One is an unfortunate common occurrence, and the other is only survivable in fiction, but that separation from reality ironically makes it a perfect vessel to explore the very real feelings these both result in. The game shows us Mia in pain not simply for the sake of showing suffering, but to allow us to connect to her, feel empathy with that pain, and thus humanize hers and, by extension, our own. To see that pain as a human part of ourselves which we can accept and work through. We, at least those of us left with great traumas, can relate to those feelings during the scenes, the hurt after, and subsequently feel empowered by her drive to continue moving forward, even though she's been hurt and scared just as many of us have. Those experiences leave a lasting impact on her, but she always gets back up and tries again. It may take some time, but she always does it, and you can too. If you've survived being hurt, then you're strong enough to heal, move on, and have hope. The game refutes nihilism and hopelessness down to its very core, not just in terms of encouraging hope rather than woeful despair, but even challenging the notion that our existence is meaningless or futile on a broad scale by drawing attention to whether or not what the superiors do is wrong. They're a carnivorous race that consumes all they encounter, without friends or family or culture, and the man himself admits that the species has no concept of meaning in their lives. They are purely nihilistic, destructive beings who exist to exist and devour. Which then begs the question, if this is just their nature, are they doing anything wrong? Are they worse than humans who breed animals just to slaughter them? And as it pertains to this game, Banya doesn't really have a grand answer for that, because as much as the superior man tries to prompt it as a moral gotcha to get a reaction out of Mia, there's no way for any person to actually answer this in some objective way. What it instead pokes at is the innate absurdity of the question through answering it in a very human way and tearing apart the callousness of the concept itself. The thematic answer to this question comes from Mia's child, who simply says that she thinks it's wrong for the superiors to kill Mia, which is simple, but I mean, it's true. And it becomes a lot more interesting once you factor in the way he in particular acts during the game. When asked why he can't subsist on the meats that humans farm, he says that it may be good enough for humans, but it's not something they can make do on. But it seems clear for later conversations this is merely because murdering beings as smart as humans is fun by his nature. He's after stimuli, and there's nothing quite as stimulating as a good hunt, a sentiment that the guest I mentioned earlier echoes. That's his innate way of life, so who are we to judge? Except he's clearly capable of enjoying other things. He tries to be a caring husband and dad and seemed to like it. He treated Aimu lovingly up until her adult life and found that to be interesting, so to some extent there's a conscious decision here to continue embracing a nihilistic and destructive life for entertainment. I think the extremely human answer that Mia's daughter gives to the question of moral relativity and the pleasure-driven actions of the superior man together serve as a fantastic takedown of this whole nihilistic kind of thought, where nothing really matters in the end, all morality is relative to the person and culture, and people suck anyways, so you may as well just do whatever pleases you. The answer that I fall on, and seemingly Banya does as well, is that human life is owed a level of respect. Our lives have meaning and importance simply because they exist and we exist with other people, and knowingly refusing this for your own pleasure, even when you can choose to do better because you think it doesn't matter or the people you're affecting are mostly boring or uninteresting as the superior man does, is simply cruelty. Is that a very emotional human answer that probably wouldn't satisfy an advanced alien race? Probably, but I honestly don't care if it is. Humans, more than anything else, are emotional beings. We bond with people, we take care of people, and above all, we're here for each other and the world we inhabit. Maybe some of us are nihilistic, maybe not all of us see meaning in life, and maybe it's hard some days to see a purpose to keep going on. But that doesn't mean life is objectively meaningless for everyone or that it even has to be for anyone, because other people alone are reason enough to keep going. And I think even despite everything happening now and what may happen in the future, I have hope that things will be alright. Ultimately, what all this stuff comes down to is just that. Hope. Shiniyuku is about hope in the end times, hope for humanity to be kind, hope for fortune to exist, and hope for the world and our societies to persist. It's about placing your faith in the ones closest to you and their faith in you so you can hope together. It's about refusing to give up even when you've met horrible fates, even when all seems for naught, even when worse comes to worse, because there is a bright future somewhere out there as long as we have even one other person close to us. After all of the suffering Mia and Aimu endured in their own lives, they still managed to make it out and see another day. day, even if they're left with complicated feelings of joy and sorrow alike towards the ones who hurt them most. It's not their responsibility to bear it. Mia and her daughter deserve better than that. They deserve love. They deserve hope and a future, and they can obtain it. We all can, no matter what we've suffered. Shiniyuku, for me, was a deeply personal read. It might seem kind of absurd from the outset, being so emotionally moved by a title that markets itself on how creatively its characters can suffer, but hear me out. I've always been a hopeful person, and reading this game I think helped me to understand myself a bit better. For most of my life, I've been mistreated and hurt by others, I've had my trust abused, and I've been through experiences that feel emotional death, yet I cannot remember anything but a void in my stomach and a surging pain in my heart. But despite that, and despite moments where I wanted to end it all, I always saw glimmers of good in the world. Some of those glimmers came from genuinely wonderful people, many of whom I'm still friends with to this day. Some of them came from people who've hurt me, all of which have left my life, even if the memories, good and bad, haven't. And some came from quiet moments by myself, thinking as I looked out a window towards nature, read a book outside, or played a game that grabbed my imagination and made me hope. Yet, no matter what, these sparks of hope, small and large alike, have been what define my outlook on life rather than the misery I've experienced. There have been days where I've been hurt, there have been months where I've been battered, there have been years where I saw nothing but a few rooms and heard only voices berating me, but those seconds where I've been happy meant more than anything else ever could, and they got me to where I am today. I think the way that Banya is capable of portraying this has been more relatable to me than any other author I've read. Seeing Mia go through all that she did, suffering from the same feelings of hurt as I did, only to decide that she won't let them define her and will keep pushing on anyways, seeing her imbue others with hope even when hers was fading, seeing her prevail at the end of it all, having gone through hell yet refusing to bow down, despite, or perhaps because of the absurdity of the game, all of those felt like real emotions. Let me be perfectly clear, this is not a game for everyone. It's filled with content that I think most readers will struggle with, and there were points where even I got way overwhelmed. It's also only in Japanese, and while fairly easy to get a hold of thanks to regular prints and digital distribution, you still have to know Japanese to read it. I think it's a pretty breezy time, maybe even recommendable as a first or second game to people who have an absurd tolerance for dark and grotesque art, but the chance of an official or unofficial translation ever collapsing that barrier are pretty low. I don't think there's really a huge market for games like this. But speaking as a weird traumatized sicko, positive, who's a sucker for hardcore artsy games with boundary-pushing content and inspiring messages, this game is pretty much all that I could have ever hoped for. It's a challenging but captivating read, and one that I'm happy I took the time to work through, and it's one that's given me a lot of hope. Not just for myself, but for the future. As long as we have each other, as long as there's still a few people that exist, I think things are gonna be okay.